Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. This is the third part in our series on what triggers the 7 years of tribulation. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus says that it is wars and rumors of war that are the beginning of sorrows. And by sorrows, he means the tribulation. But there are false prophets who would have you believe that some kind of covenant between the Antichrist and Israel is what triggers the Great Tribulation. Let's look at Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. In chapter 9, verse 27, Daniel writes, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week." Now I disagree with the false prophets on all 4 of the points in this passage. First, I contend that the he is the prophet Elijah, not the Antichrist. Second, I believe that the covenant confirmed is not the Abrahamic covenant, but rather the Messianic covenant. Third, the many refers to the remnant Israel and not the state of Israel. And fourth, the 1 week refers to the first half of the tribulation and not the trigger for the tribulation. Now the false prophets point to one passage in Isaiah which they claim verify that the Antichrist confirms this covenant. Let's look at this passage from Isaiah. In chapter 28, verse 15, Isaiah writes, "Because you have said we have made a covenant with death and an agreement with hell, when the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come to us." Now this could be a covenant with the Antichrist, but I believe it is much more likely that Isaiah is referring to the scribes and Pharisees at Jesus' first ministry. If you remember the passages from Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, their descriptions of the covenant in each case were preceded by a description of the Jews returning to Israel. Now in this passage from Isaiah 28, there is no description of the Jews returning to Israel before this covenant that Isaiah is talking about. Also in Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel, their description of the covenant was followed by descriptions of either Armageddon or the millennium. But in this passage from Isaiah, the prophet talks about Jesus' first coming. In verse 16, Isaiah writes, "Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I lay in Zion a foundation stone." Now this foundation stone is the cornerstone and refers to Jesus and his first ministry on planet Earth. And Isaiah concludes this passage, "Your covenant with death will be abolished, and your agreement with hell shall not stand." Now this could refer to a covenant by the Antichrist, which is ended with Armageddon. But as I said, before this passage, Isaiah talks about Jesus as the cornerstone. In other words, Jesus' first ministry on earth. Therefore, this overflowing scourge that he is writing about refers to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD by the Roman general Titus. Now just what is this Messianic covenant, which the prophet Elisha confirms with 144,000 remnant Jews? I believe that this is the covenant which Jesus himself established at the Lord's Supper, as we read in the Gospel. In Matthew, this is the blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sin. And in Mark, this is the blood of the covenant, which is shed for many. And also St. Paul writes in Corinthians, "In the same manner he also took the cup, saying, This cup is the cup of the new covenant. As often as you do this in remembrance of me." Now if we go back to Daniel, we will see that this interpretation makes a lot of sense. And Daniel writes, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week." Now that refers to the prophet Elijah. "And in the midst of the week he," that is the Antichrist, "shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease." So now we see these two passages are related. The sacrifice and the oblation, which the Antichrist causes to cease, is the Lord's Supper. And the covenant which Elijah confirms is also the Lord's Supper. And if you would like more information, simply write to the address you see on your screen.